Hi everyone, and welcome to Analysing Learning Impact in Context, the Sponge Way. And I want to start just by talking about a couple of little stories. And if you've seen the LinkedIn video before, you might know sort of what I'm going to get into. But imagine we're planning a trip or planning an adventure. And this sort of happened to me back in the day when I was in Australia, when me and a good friend of mine, Jack, we planned to meet up for an adventure day, and we ended up meeting on Clovelly Beach in Sydney. I had all my walking gear, assuming that we were going to do one of the classic coastal walks we've been doing from Spitbridge to Manly, Bondi to Coogee, etc. And that's when Jack stepped off the bus, pretty much in full snorkeling gear, with his fins on, with his mask on. So I'd kind of forgotten that Jack was half fish, and we ended up having a great day. But there was definitely that mismatch in terms of what he thought I meant in terms of going for a bit of a trip for an adventure, and what I thought. So what I'd realized is getting that detail up front really, really does matter, and sort of finding out before actually meeting to do that day trip. And I thought I'd had it sussed out when I went on a walk with my dad. So he'd said, let's go for a walk. And what I'd forgotten or didn't realize with him asking me to go for this walk was actually part of the National Coast to Coast Trail. And it was one of the more difficult stretches. So even though I thought I'd packed adequately, I was definitely ill-equipped. And he said, don't worry, we're not going there. Well, halfway through, we had a bit of a route change. So in fact, we did go up there. But the thing is, this mismatch in terms of what adventure means, what walk means to different people, happens all the time in the world of corporate learning as well. So you may have heard a couple of these statements before. So how do we know that this will actually change what people are doing? This functionality is great, it's fun, but are they learning something? A couple more examples on there. And we as learning professionals often jump straight into creating something amazing, courses, training programs, digital tools, without fully understanding the landscape of what our learners' reality is and the strategic goals of the business. So there's that mismatch in terms of what the business is asking for and what L&D understand. So we assume we know what people want and need, or we rely solely on briefs that might lack a little bit of clarity or contain some hidden assumptions. So just like those trips, those assumptions can feel logical and right when I'm planning for them, but only to fall bit flat when you actually get together. And the cost of getting this wrong in learning isn't just that awkwardness or disappointment or just being really tired climbing up a hill. It can lead to wasted resources, disengaged learners, and failure to deliver those meaningful results for the business. It can even damage that trust between L&D teams, stakeholders, and learners, making future efforts a little bit harder. So how do you avoid those? And that's where our impact map comes in, that helps bridge that gap. But before we get into that, let's properly introduce ourselves. So, hi everyone, I'm James Gordon. This is me back in my uni degree. And I'm sure, as a lot of you L&D and HR professionals can relate to, L&D wasn't my sort of first love. My first love was product design. And anyone who's worked with me will know that is sort of an underlying current in the way that I think, that design thinking. And a little bit of background. So I actually worked in the Middle East for a bit as a freelancer, and I worked with Operation Smile and a whole host of different businesses. Ended up moving back to England, working again as a freelancer. Then my first foray into L&D, training coordinator, L&D design analyst. I mean, that's a long job title, say that 3 times fast, at rental cars. And then ended up deciding to go to Australia, where I was trying to be a digital nomad. That didn't really work out, the whole freelancing thing. But I ended up getting a really great job at Be Online Learning as an instructional designer, where I really built out those L&D principles. And eventually moving to Co-op, where I moved up the ranks from learning designer to actually leading the studio, and now at Sponge, where I'm absolutely loving the challenge and having that real strategic view of supporting businesses. So when I was putting together this webinar, I really wanted to pull something together that James 12 months ago could really use when he was like leading the team and that type of thing. And you may have noticed the more eagle-eyed ones of you will see that back in my uni degree, I had discover, define, develop, deliver on my posters. And this is an underlying design thinking methodology that I use all the time. But anyway, enough about me. I'll hand over to Tom.
Nice one, James. Thank you. Hey, everyone. I'm Tom. I'm the practice lead here at Sponge. So great team of learning consultants that we have here. and it's us that really put into practice what myself and James are gonna be introducing to you today. I haven't travelled the world with work as much as James, so I've gone with a slightly different approach. And I definitely want to start with James stole my map idea here, but then obviously made it look way better with all his travel. So a little bit of a different approach from me. Worked with a lot of different global clients, so a list of some of those there, but some of the most fun ones definitely being in North America, really kind of exciting place to work at the moment. Outside of work, I very much enjoy music, live music, music outdoors, so things like festivals, really great way to unwind. And then for me, traveling as well. So huge fan of Southeast Asia, been to various countries over there, particularly the food over there as well. So just a little bit about me, and as I say, a little less exciting than James, but good nonetheless. I want to start today by making a really bold claim. Most learning teams are chasing impact, but they're chasing it backwards. Now, just staying on that kind of food point, James and I were looking for a way that we could explain this. So think about one of those amazing kind of Asian dishes, and you maybe want to make one of those at home. You know what you want to make, you know what you want the outcome to be. What James and I are going to be talking about today isn't how prepared for that you can be. It isn't the slicing, the dicing, the weighing, or anything like that. It comes even before that. This is where we're consulting the recipe. This is where we're familiarizing ourselves with things like the fundamentals of what we need to do, and we're making our shopping list. What you're going to get in this next 50 minutes. Why getting the input right is crucial to the output, the foundation to our impact map, using that map and the different stages, and then where that map's going to take you. An important point to call out here, if you've got any questions, please do drop them in the chat. We're going to try and answer them as we move through, or if we get to them at the end. If we can't get back to them, we'll make sure we get back to you with a response. So all questions will get answered at some point for you. So what we're looking at today, I want to start by just looking at this. We get obsessed with the output, dashboards, completions, platforms, all of that shiny stuff. Whereas in reality, real impact starts upstream. It's not about the output, it's about that input. It's about asking the right questions in the right context. So your learning initiatives are hyper aligned with your business priorities. So we see words bounded around a lot in L&D, sometimes with very little to back them up. Other words, they crop up continuously. So we regularly get asked to create engaging learning solutions, like we're intentionally setting out to not do that. So we were thinking, do we have to ask ourselves the same about impact? Have we officially reached the stage where impact could mean anything from that strategic shift to someone dropping a stapler in the office? And I know I'm exaggerating, but to make the point, real business impact means different things in different places. So if we don't first define what that means in your world, then we're never going to be able to measure that meaningfully. So today's session is less about giving you a checklist, more about kind of shifting thinking. We want to leave you with kind of confidence, and James is going to share an incredibly effective tool to really kind of think strategically about impacting your organizations, not in the abstract. So we just want to kind of give you a quick introduction as to what underpins that here at Sponge, and then James is going to take that forward for you. So the real challenge for us is about asking the right question. It's about understanding where the business is today and where the business is trying to go. And we see this all the time, where we have incredibly capable leaders who know their craft inside out. They know the business. But when we ask what's actually going on in that business right now, or what are their top strategic priorities, there's a pause. They have to think about that. So that is our starting point. That's where we want to understand where that business is today, and then unpick where the business is trying to go. And the answers are all there. You can find them in things like shareholder reports, CEO town halls, quarterly priorities. Although the best thing is just to kind of get face time with these stakeholders, sit down, have a conversation, ask them, what are they trying to accomplish this year? So a couple of minutes on how this fits in at Sponge and what we do. We have something called 3E. This is our way of approaching strategic thinking and how we link where the business is today to where we need to be. It's effectively kind of a napkin exercise, a calibration tool. but a really effective way of communicating the ask, where we can talk about the environment, the evidence, and the experiences that make up a learning intervention. And that becomes kind of our hypothesis. And that's what gives us where we need to go and how we can achieve that intended change. So upfront in this part of the process is getting the right question. We call this the compelling question. And getting this question right, that becomes your compass. It's going to tell you where to go, what to measure, most importantly, what to ignore. We've all heard the term kind of garbage in, garbage out. This is where we really focus on getting this right at the start. If we've got a really compelling question that's clearly framed, that unlocks everything for us and how we can go on to achieve everything we need. So what is a compelling question, and why do we believe in it so much? It basically reframes the challenge. We've kind of got 5 key rules to how we put them together. Reframes the challenge as a business one, not a learning one. So it will use the language of the organization, and it has no mention of training or learning. We use the language of how within there, so linked to that design thinking, and we connect it to that kind of business imperative. And it's not called a compelling question just for the nice name. We want it to be compelling. We want people to want to solve it. And the best kind of question is one that engages teams, engages stakeholders, and can energize them in wanting to solve this challenge as well. And we've got lots more details on this. Josh at Sponge has done a webinar on 3E and even a webinar on the compelling question, which digs much deeper. Massively recommend checking those out. But just want to sort of drop a compelling question onto the screen here. How we've put it together kind of for this session. How might we show up as the strategic partner to our clients that they didn't know they needed, by connecting what we create to the behavior shifts that drive business results? So you can see those rules in action there. So when we talk about impact, said it's not just talking about outcomes, it's about those upstream inputs and what we ask ourselves. So a quick breakdown of what this looks like. So when we talk about measuring impact, it's not just about outcomes, it's about those upstream inputs that I've mentioned. We ask ourselves the questions: are we aligned with the business? Have we mapped the right behaviors and not just personas? And have we designed with those strategic outcomes in mind? Because most organizations, they don't fail to deliver impact because they're doing the wrong thing. It's because they're solving the wrong problem. So from our experience and working with various different global organizations, we've been able to hone kind of the core of our approach. And we shift from these questions into making really great statements. So we can shift these to, we help teams design to their metrics and not just report on them. We map strategy to behavior, not just to courses. And then we treat impact like an evolving conversation and not just a one-off survey. So from this session today, we, as I say, want to leave you kind of with that confidence and understanding this and how you can make that shift as well. So one last thing from me before I pass to James to really dig into everything. Impact doesn't have to mean revolution. Some of the most powerful changes come from 1% gains applied strategically, but measured well and done consistently. So that was a very brief kind of grounding as to kind of what sits behind this impact map and impact measurement. So I'm going to pass to James. He can expand more on things and about how we map and how we articulate that impact.
Thanks, Tom. And before we go straight into the impact map and looking at how to actually build one and go through it, I gathered some thoughts for your consideration. So just wanted to share some of our foundational thinking. And I just want to throw it out there. What percentage of organizations have a measurement strategy? And actually, it's a lot lower than you might think. It's only 23% of organizations that have a learning measurement strategy. And that's that sort of definitive focus on linking learning to individual and organizational performance. And I know, Tom, you had a look at this report as well.
Yeah, this report's got some great stats in. That's a good one. There was another one in there with maybe just over half of the respondents said their learning function is either aligned or well aligned to supporting their organization's performance goals. So a lot of improvement that could be made there. And something like 40% of respondents said they were proficient or highly proficient at identifying performance outcomes prior to designing and delivering. So again, massive space for improvement in those figures.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things as well, when we're creating digital learning, you might have felt or have faced criticism a bit like this, where, you've got... So essentially, when you're creating digital learning, you need to consider what the learners actually need. And for these learners, this learning isn't actually giving them what they need. There's a disconnect here from what that learner needs in their role to what the learning is actually giving. And actually, learner wants and needs, they're just one part of the puzzle. So we also need to consider what the business needs. So this is a real-world example of what happens when learning's launched without a clear understanding of the behavior it's trying to shift, or how that shift connects to the goals of the organization, or in this example, the English government, who made a very decisive move to scrap unconscious bias training across the civil service. The reason? There's no evidence that it changes behavior. And this wasn't just a quiet internal policy change. It was a very public example of how learning without clear behavioral impact becomes, operationally vulnerable. So some of the consequences here are wasted resources, that frustration from teams who felt the training was either superficial or box-ticking, that loss of credibility for the L&D function across the departments, and the missed opportunity to address those real structural issues. So the intent was there and the effort was real, but unfortunately, it just didn't pan out. And this is what can happen when we miss the mark. The English government scrapping that unconscious bias training, the English government scrapping that unconscious bias training is just a reminder of what happens when learning is based on assumptions, that behavior change isn't clearly defined, results aren't measured, and outcomes aren't aligned to strategic goals. So it is really considering what is the evidence, or in this case, the lack thereof? What is the environment? What is happening day to day? And in terms of that experience, were assumptions made there? So learner needs and business needs, they're just two parts of this. The third sort of consideration I'd like you to think about is constraints. So every business has its own constraints. Some LMSs, may only run on Windows 7, or your business runs on Windows 7. So there's things like your devices, your tech stack, your LMS, and your budget. There is learner time, your culture, bandwidth, and this isn't a mistake. Budget is on there twice for a reason. And time, your people, licenses, and once again, budget, because we know budget is super important to everyone who's watching this and everyone who works with an L&D. But the reason it's up there 3 times is because linking your learning to business goals is what unlocks that budget. And when we're designing with these 3 factors in mind, we really want to try and hit the sweet spot of giving our learners what they want and need, giving the business what it needs, and designing around those constraints. Now, it is a lot to keep in the back of your mind, these learner wants and needs, business needs, and constraints. And also 3E, that environment, the experiences, and evidence. So this is why we wanted to create the impact map, which is your anchor point, which brings all of this together onto a concise board with all your thinking in one place. Now, this is a phrase that I always felt applied to L&D, and because the idea of an impact map isn't a new one. So as Austin Kleon's book states, steal like an artist because nothing's original, and embrace influence, which is what we did. And this is the original impact map. So what is an impact map? It's a strategic planning tool used primarily in product development and project management. It's to visualize the connection between business goals, the people involved, their behaviors, and the deliverables or features that can help to achieve those goals. And it helps people stay aligned and focused on delivering value rather than just building features. So it very much comes from the world of software development. And this was proposed by a software delivery consultant called Gojko Adzic. And he developed it as a way to help teams build better software by focusing on outcomes rather than outputs. So essentially, what are the pieces that make an impact map? Well, you've got the goal, the why. This is the central node of the map. It defines the business objective or the problem that you're trying to solve. The actors, the who, these are the people or groups that you can influence, who are influenced by the outcome or are affected by it. So your users, your customers, stakeholders in the world of software development. the impact. So these describe the changes in behavior you want to see in the actors to achieve that goal. And finally, those deliverables. So the what. These are the features, products, or actions that can create the desired impact. So this is the original impact map. What does an impact map look like at Sponge? So very similar to Gotchko Adzich's version of an impact map, we have 4 stages in ours. We have the goal. So understanding what the business is actually trying to achieve. So this is more of a business lens rather than a specific problem that we're trying to solve. The driver. So we want to zoom in on the people. What's the change that we want to see in how they think, feel, and act? So it's really more about that human shift, that human-centered design thinking. Then next we want to look at behavior, making it tangible. What would we see people doing differently? Now, the reason we really zoom in on behavior is because if you can't observe it, you can't measure it. And lastly, those enablers. So rather than thinking about deliverables, we want to think in the terms of experiences. So we're clear on what behaviors we want to see, and we explore the kind of experiences that support them. So when we go into thinking about the goal, knowing why we're doing something is the key to making those good decisions about cost, scope, and timelines, both at the start and later when things change. And this, from the original impact map, doesn't change for us here. It's a fundamental part of impact mapping. And when it comes to L&D, you may have heard some of these statements before. We've got a new system and we need to train that system to our teams. Managers aren't filling in one-to-one notes on our HR system. We need a learning course on it. How many times have you heard that? We want to upskill our sales team so they're more productive. Well, those are the things that we get on our briefs. But what's actually behind those statements? For every ask, there's a strategic business reason, and we just need to uncover it. And as the L&D detective Kevin M. Yates says, impact is when learning activates performance and a business goal. So it's really doing that detective work up front. And when we think about this particular case study, so managers aren't filling in one-to-one notes on our HR system, we need a learning course. What the business actually needs is they need to reduce their employee relations cases by 10%. And our first hypothesis would be, how might we make it easy and worthwhile for managers to document and act on performance conversations before those problems escalate? So this is our first take on the compelling question. And as you'll see as we go through the impact map, we come back to challenge that. Because like all good hypotheses, we test it. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of the impact map then. And just to preface this, we'll share the template of the impact map as well. So this is just sort of talking us through it. But let's begin at the only place that makes sense, the goal. It's one of the most commonly skipped steps, I feel, in learning projects, where we assume we know the goal without digging deeper. We really want to understand what the business is trying to achieve. So it's not about content yet. It's not about behaviors yet. It is about the measurable shift that the organization wants to see. So what's the business outcome that we're trying to enable? And we view each of these steps through the lens of 3E. So here, when we're looking at evidence, we ask what metrics would make the business feel like this is working? What would show us that that needle is moving? What dashboards, KPIs, or performance data already exist that we can pull out on that information? What data tells us this is a real issue and not just perception? So if we're thinking about that one-to-one, that example of the one-to-ones, we really need to think about what are the things that we're seeing here, and not just in terms of that HR data, on that macro data as well. So looking at the environment, this is where we ask the business, what are the forces that are affecting you or the market that push this goal into focus? Is there a new leadership mandate? Is it driven by a change in regulation? Is it a market opportunity or a risk that's now urgent? Understanding this helps us frame the goal in context. It shows us not just what needs to happen, but why now? And that's critical for engagement and buy-in within the rest of the business. And finally, we look at the experience. So we zoom in on what's happening for people right now. What's already been tried, what's working, what's not. And this helps us avoid duplicating efforts or falling into the trap of solving the wrong problem. For example, we might find that onboarding feels really long for new hires, but they're not asking for faster. They're actually asking for more detail, more clarity. And in that case, the problem isn't duration. It's more about the confidence that they get once they complete the onboarding. So this lived experience layer helps us refine that business goal into something that's more human and meaningful. Now, once we've gone through that consultative phase and we've spoken to various people and gathered our information, we then bring it together with an agreed goal statement. So here, the agreed goal statement, we try and bring it into, we try and make it as tangible as possible by using the SMART framework, which is something I'm sure you're not a stranger to, but that specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and timely statement. Just the reason that we want to put it into that is it's something that we can measure and something that we can come back to and see if we have moved the dial on it. It gives us a direction of travel. So if we succeed, we should see fewer escalations, that culture of earlier intervention in the case of our one-to-one sort of case study. And that 10% improvement metric in our SMART goal gives us a specific target to work towards, and we can revisit it during and after we deliver the solution. And here on the screen, there's a couple of examples, and the one with the gold star is the one that's we said that's the one that we're going for. So what we'll do is we'll take all that thinking and put it on one page. So this is our SMART goal: reduce formal employee relations cases by 10% within 6 months by increasing the percentage of managers documenting one-to-ones in the HR system from 40% to 80%. So it's a very tangible goal. And I know that, Tom, you had an example that you wanted to share about something where we really got to grips with the problem.
Nice one. Thanks, James. So we've got an example for each of the points that James will go through. And this first one is around hashtag Speak Up campaign that we worked with a global pharmaceutical company. So the real goal in this partnership was to kind of prioritize that as a culture, to really kind of shift and develop that. But the twist being through non-mandatory learning. So for us, getting to grips with that problem was, how are we going to engage this learning audience with it being non-mandatory learning? So we use social platforms. So we use something that they were super familiar with. We've got Workplace and we've got WeChat. We wanted to make sure that everything we put forward was super accessible and really kind of familiar, something they're used to using at work, and really kind of lowering that barrier for entry. And then finally, putting something forward that was a real kind of recognizable identity, almost like a brand within a brand. So when they saw this, they knew exactly what it was, and it was in a channel that they were most familiar with. And a couple of years on from launching this, we understand there's still really great success with what we put forward.
Fab. Thanks, Tom. So we've looked at the goal. We've defined what we're going to achieve. This is where we need to look at what do we need, who do we need to influence and to help achieve that goal. And people remember experiences as stories and as events, as sort of encapsulated here from Nick Shackleton-Jones's book, How People Learn. So we need to understand those people before we design for them. And this is where we look at the driver. So we've established our business goal, that measurable outcome. What we need to look at now is what needs to shift in people to make that outcome possible. So for our case study, who do we need to focus on to shift to support this one-to-one sort of culture that we're trying to change here? Because the reality is, learning isn't the thing that moves metrics. It's the people that do. Learning is just the enabler. The true driver of business success is a shift in what people believe, feel, prioritize, and ultimately do. So it's easy to say we want more confident managers or we want teams to collaborate more, but those vague aspirations don't give us something to design around. So here we're asking, who are the people that would make success more likely? So when we're looking at evidence, we think less about the hard data points and more about the soft signals. So what would people say or do differently if the shift was happening? Would we hear different language in team meetings? Would peers start modeling or reinforcing certain behaviors? Would sentiment improve on poll surveys or engagement check-ins? And we also want to think about those knowledge gaps. What do people not know or understand today that's contributing to the issue? These are the signals that help us know whether change is starting to happen, and they shape what we might want to measure later. So like all the other steps we're going to go through, we look at this through the lens of 3E, of course. So we want to think about the environment and experience. So for environment, again, it's all about context. If someone wants to change, what's in the system that will help or hinder that? Are the tools or systems enabling our goal? Are priorities or processes reinforcing those right expectations? And is leadership modeling that desired shift or quietly pulling in the other direction? If you want people to change, to challenge those assumptions in meetings, but those meetings are rushed and hierarchical, your environment just isn't ready. So looking at that culture, those systems, and those pressure points, they're all clues. Now, thinking about experience, what's it like to be in, these employee shoes right now? What are they facing day to day? Have they tried to make the shift before and been burned? Is there fear, frustration, or confusion? Or maybe they've already started shifting and we can amplify what's working. Maybe you have a little rebellion happening internally. So sometimes this is the part that really uncovers those little nuggets of gold, like a team that wants to innovate but is stuck waiting for sign-off, or a new starter cohort that's eager to lead but lacks clarity on what good looks like. So by grounding that impact in lived experience, we're able to design with empathy. So in our example of our one-to-ones, looking at what is happening, how people are experiencing that challenge. So what we do is we pull together all this thinking and we think about the different audiences that we're going to try and enable. And I just want you to look at the language here in terms of how we structured our audiences. So we realized that to move the needle, you can't focus on just one specific group of people. The change needs to be supported, enabled, and reinforced by a wider ecosystem. So we deliberately, in this case, expand our audience to 3 key audiences. So people who manage one-to-ones, because they're the ones who need to take action, spot performance issues early, document early, and have those meaningful one-to-ones. People who support the business, because they're often the first line of support, and we need to ensure that we're engaging with managers or, those people who manage one-to-ones, and not just stepping in during escalations. And those people who participate in one-to-ones, because they're part of the picture too. Their experience of performance conversations and their trust in the process helps shape how effective the whole system is. Now, you may think these aren't role titles, and that is done intentionally, and I will touch on that in a moment. But all that thinking on a page, essentially, here is our first sort of spurs off on our impact map. We look at our 3 different audiences, all linked to our goal. And Tom, I know you've got another example where we really got to the grips of what the audience needed.
Thanks, James. So this was a global fashion brand, and we're working with their retail academy. So the challenge that they came to us with was their global sales force was really kind of lacking a joined up approach, and they wanted us to really kind of drive a new level of confidence in their products and then lead on to the increased sales. So they wanted something like a really innovative approach to their product knowledge training. But when we're looking at this through the lens of kind of motivating an audience, we wanted to make sure we went a layer deeper than that. So for us, that's kind of uncovering more about this audience. So understanding what they see as value versus what they perceive as value, really kind of unpicking those details. And then going beyond just looking at this global sales force, but aligning sales with customer education. So 2 lenses around the same challenge. And then finally, the psychology which sits behind sales. Again, taking it that layer deeper and really understanding what sits behind these motivations and therefore how we can land that innovative approach with this group.
Fab. Thanks, Tom. And really interesting here just on customer personas, because I've got a little side note on personas actually. So in a lot of learning design processes, you'll see personas being used. They might be fictional characters like Retail Rachel or Manager Mo, complete with photos, quotes, backstories. And to be fair, they can be really helpful for building empathy. They remind us to humanize that learner experience. But the catch here is they're often based on assumptions. And if we rely too heavily on personas, we start designing for who we think people are, not what they actually do. So what do we do instead? We think about it in segments. So real groups based on what people do. So if you noticed before, it was managers who hold one-to-ones, people who support the business, people who are participating in one-to-ones. This helps us not get stuck in role profiles and focusing more on what behaviors we want to see within those groups so we can focus on that observable behavior. It's the difference between who they are and what they do. So these groupings are typically based on those patterns of behavior, that motivation, context, not job titles or stereotypes. So we ask, how do different people engage with this topic? Where are they on that curve of change? What's stopping them? What's enabling them? What have they tried before? What do they do now? So it's a shift from who is this person to how do they currently behave in this space? So looking at a persona, we have Sophie. She's 29. She's a first-time manager. She's new to the role. And it's really great in terms of creating, building that empathy and really understanding what her goals are, what her needs are, and getting a little bit of a background on our persona of Sophie. But if we're thinking about our one-to-one case study, we might not get answers to questions like, is Sophie avoiding those difficult conversations? Is she giving vague or general praise instead of specific actionable feedback? Is she following a script, or is she going completely off script? And these insights lead to very different learning experiences. So maybe we design one path for someone who's avoiding feedback altogether, but that doesn't work for someone else who actually does act on that feedback. So when we define impact and behavior in the steps of our impact map, we begin to naturally surface those behavioral patterns across our learner population. So we're not asking, what kind of learner is this? We're asking, what's getting in the way of the behavior that we need to see? And in my personal experience, it's really, really easy to get caught up in the creative writing and assumptions versus the real world observations. And as someone who's made quite a lot of personas, they are very fun to create, but it's just that reminder of make sure it is grounded in that research. So now, looking at the behavior, and this is from a leadership perspective, from Shlomo Ben-Hur and Nick Kinley on the book called Changing Employee Behavior, because ultimately, the success of leaders is defined by the ability to change behaviors. And looking at behavior, let's have a little bit more of a deep dive here. We've defined our business goal. We know the impact and the shift that we want to see within the groups of people that we're trying to change that behavior in. So now we want to know, what exactly should people be doing differently in their day-to-day role? And this is where we define that behavior. One of the most common mistakes in learning design is to stop at those sort of vague intentions. Like, people need to be more confident. They need to embrace change. They should be better communicators. But what does that actually look like? Because confidence isn't behavior. Change readiness isn't a behavior. And even knowledge technically isn't a behavior, because behavior is action. It's what someone says or does in a specific situation at a specific moment that we can see, hear, or track. And this matters for two reasons. If we can't describe it, we can't design for it. And if we can't observe it, we can't measure its success. Learning has to change what people do, not just what they know or feel. And this is where we draw the line between that aspiration and action. So looking at evidence, this is where we want to ask, how will we know this behavior is happening? Again, what can be seen, heard, or measured? Could we capture it through tools such as CRM entries or completion logs? Would managers be able to observe it in meetings or reviews? And could it be reflected in feedback from peers or clients? And without this clear evidence, behavior change is purely speculative. With it, we need something tangible to work towards. So again, let's look a little bit more at the environment. So in terms of the environment, we need to consider where this behavior is happening. This is about making it possible for people to apply what they've learned. So here we ask, when and where does this action need to occur? Is there a system that enables it or one that blocks it? Are there routines, processes, or cultural norms that we need to reinforce or discourage to get that behavior? So, for example, if we want managers to give regular informal feedback, but the only time they engage with their teams is in performance reviews, that's a problem. So that environment isn't supporting that new behavior that we want to see. And just a point to sort of look at here, when we're thinking about the environment, at this point, it can feel easy to slip into thinking about, what are the enablers? And that's really great information to capture, but it's really easy to go into solution mode at this point. And I found from my personal experience that I need to step back and hold myself back before going straight into solution mode at this point. So lastly, we need to think about the experience. Step into the learner's shoes and ask, what does it actually feel like to try this new behavior? If I'm a manager who doesn't like do one-to-ones or give regular feedback, what would it feel like for me to try? Does it feel risky? Will I get it wrong? Will I be worried about being judged? Or does it feel empowering? Do I feel supported or safe? This is often a hidden barrier. So you might want, to have that great content, you need that clear goal. But if people feel uncertain or exposed trying something new, that's when it's really easy to revert back to habit. So it's really good to ask at this point, what would make this feel easier, more natural, more rewarding? And like with the two previous sort of stages on the impact map, we think about that change statement. So we try and summarize these. So again, we're using those three audiences that we defined before: the people who manage one-to-ones, people who support the business, and people who participate in one-to-ones. And here specifically, we're thinking about what this behavior feels like for them. And you'll see these sort of summarized here with all that thinking on a page, where you have your goal, the driver, and these are the behaviors that we want to see within our case study. So I'll pass back to Tom just to talk a little bit about some of that behavior change that we've done with one of our clients.
Thanks, James. Again, another really interesting one, actually a public-facing one as well, where we partnered with Atlassian to enhance their customer education and really drive their kind of product adoption at Atlassian University. So using their words, to move from that clunky customer education approach into a visual ecosystem that helps users get stuff done. So yeah, super interesting. Can take a look at this one, but to be able to kind of get to that kind of behavior change, how could we really engage those kind of end users? We use diagnostic tooling, so we could really personalize the experience for users, really kind of speak to those individuals. And our goal was to kind of convert casual users into power advocates. So by personalizing that experience, by putting the right things in front of them, it wasn't just kind of a click through and a look around. It was actually kind of a tailored experience, which really kind of enhanced what they would go on to use and do, and ultimately apply that kind of behavior change, and giving them a kind of a safe space to practice as well. So giving them knowledge application in practical simulations. So not just expecting by giving them knowledge that this will go and happen, giving them a safe space to practice, really driving that as part of that personalized experience. And then, as I say, turning what could be a casual user into a power advocate and really going on to have that kind of meaningful behavior change.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tom. And it's really interesting, particularly for this one, because such a fantastic company, and seeing the change that's been made there is, and the fantastic work of the visual design team as well. It's one of my favorite ones to look at. So essentially, we've done our goal, we've looked at the driver, and we've looked at our behaviors. Now is a natural point, and you'll see this in the template, where we can revisit the compelling question. So looking at all the things that we've sort of discussed within this business or this case study, our one-to-one sort of case study, it's not actually about recording those conversations that's the issue. It's more about reducing that people risk. And sort of identifying those issues earlier. And one of the great things about revisiting the compelling question here is it sort of gives us permission to check our thinking before we move forward. So it's not about undermining that earlier work. It's very much about refining it. It's a chance to course correct, adjust scope, and make sure what we're designing for is still solving the right problem. And it's also a nice point to sort of create a shared strategic anchor, where the compelling question is something that we can return to, and we can use it with project teams as we go forwards. So it's a really nice opportunity for us to just sense check, a bit of a litmus test as to how are we doing going through this process? Do we need to change direction? Are we still focusing on the right audience and the right people? So now that we've done the goal, the impact, and the behavior, we start to think about those enabling moments. And there's a tendency for us in L&D when we think about deliverables and think in sort of that sort of final thing that we're going to create. But when you consider the complex nature of what L&D is trying to achieve to change that behavior, stepping back from that one and done approach isn't just a nice to have, it's a necessity. And from Nick Shackleton-Jones's book here, as you'll know, I'm a fan of his from using 2 quotes of his. If you wish to build capability, design experiences. So that defining characteristic of experience is something that's emotionally impactful. So we need to consider all the different parts. So we're essentially designing for a network of people here, rather than just one specific audience. So going into that enabling people, we've got our clear line. Now we want to ask what makes that behavior easier, more likely, or more meaningful in the real world. And these might be tools, they might be assets, but they're also strategically placed moments that support that behavior change, right when it matters most. And why do moments matter rather than thinking specifically about deliverables? So we can make a course, we can write a guide, we can launch a campaign, but when we focus only on outputs, we risk forgetting about timing, context, and relevance. So a well-written guide is fantastic, but it's useless if it lives in a folder that no one opens. A brilliant video doesn't matter if it arrives 6 weeks too late. So instead of asking, what should we make? We ask, when and where does someone need support? And that's when we zoom into those critical moments or those sort of micro moments where behavior either happens or it doesn't. So looking at evidence, this is where we start to build in those signals that show people are engaging with or applying with what we've built. So did more people complete a task? Was there an uptick in usage or reporting? Sometimes it's a bit more behavioral. Are people giving feedback more often? Are they applying a technique that they previously avoided? So the measurability or the measurement here doesn't need to be complex, but it should be intentional. And this is where we can start thinking about the detail of where we're making these measurements. And looking at the environment, where does this moment sort of naturally belong? Is it just before a manager has a one-to-one? Is it when a new hire logs in on the system? Is it right after someone receives difficult feedback? This is where you think about touch points in the flow of work, those natural intersections where a nudge, prompt, or resource can appear just in time rather than as a separate learning moment. So we think about maybe a checklist embedded in a task, a conversation guide that's linked in a system, a short explainer video that's surfaced in a real-time scenario, something like that. When we think about experience, what helps make this moment feel a little bit more seamless? A quick visual that explains a tricky process, maybe a reassuring message that removes a little bit of uncertainty. Sometimes those enabling moments don't feel like learning at all. They're useful nudges, tools, or interventions that show up just at the right time. So our goal isn't just effectiveness, but ease. So we want people to say, that really helped me, not I had to complete this. And this is where it's really good to bring your design thinkers into this process, where we start to think about our enablers. We try and translate this into tangible outcomes. And we're not creating content for the sake of it. This is those moments I mentioned before that support that behavior change in context. So that could mean a HR system right before a one-to-one, or a Slack thread where managers share how they handle a tricky situation. We take everything that we've mapped so far and try and bring that into those sort of tangible pieces. Challenge yourself. Am I building something that's lasting here? Because when you're creating for a network of people, it's really easy to think about, your one and done thing. You need to think about that long-lasting sort of change and shift that you want to create. So stop designing just for content and start designing for context, because in the end, it's not what about people know, it's what they do when it matters most. And when we translate all that thinking onto one page, it may look a little overfacing, but essentially what you've got here is that clear link of what you're doing in terms of your deliverables and outcomes, mapping back to that behavior, stepping back into the driver or the audience that we're looking at, link back to that tangible business goal that we've spent that time and effort up front to create in that SMART framework. And imagine how powerful it would be that if you had a senior stakeholder in the business come to you and say, well, I asked you to create that one-to-one learning module how come you haven't done it? And how powerful would it be to show them this map? And here's all the things that we're doing instead to answer that specific ask. And here's all the tangible ways that we're going to measure it as well. And here's all the things that all the thinking that we've done. I mean, ideally that scenario wouldn't happen because that person would be brought along this journey with you. But just to call out that if you are challenged, you have it really clear, all mapped out on one page. And I'm just going to hand over to Tom to talk about a really memorable piece of learning initiative that we created here at Sponge.
Yep, final one from me, James. When we say memorable, this one we believe isn't just going to be memorable for the learners. I think it's memorable for a lot of people who worked on this at Sponge as well. This was an iteration of an event that had been running for over a decade with Meta, and it's a month-long security awareness campaign. So we worked really kind of closely with those to how can we shift from what was previously in-person events to a really kind of memorable digital experience. We used a blend of storytelling, gamification, a whole host of different kind of media to really kind of bring this to life. And 3 points to kind of call out here. We made it kind of a really immersive digital experience. So when we think about memorable, we think about how can we make this sticky? How can we make people want to come back to this? So really kind of worked on making it engaging and, as I mentioned before, reducing things like barriers to entry. We used a bespoke interactive microsite, so where we could rely kind of on existing technology, we really kind of pushed the boundaries here and created that kind of bespoke microsite that would have all of the features we need. And just coming off the point James made about measurement, was allowing us to kind of measure all of the success of all the pieces we were putting in there as well. So a really kind of integral part to making this memorable. And then finally, a staggered content release strategy. So this is a month-long campaign. Rather than front-loading it, again, to make it kind of sticky, make it engaging, really kind of make it accessible, having a really kind of detailed strategy where we could release learning at a rate where it could be consumed and kind of engaged with as we wanted it to be, before kind of moving on to the next, really, really worked well on this. And as I mentioned, we were able to track and measure that as we move through as well. So as I say, this we believe is memorable still within Meta and very much here within Sponge as well.
Fab. Thanks, Tom. And you might be asking yourself, this impact map, I thought it was a map. Where does it take me to? So what I've done is I've taken a few sort of really effective methodologies that I'm sure you're already using in your business to demonstrate exactly where this takes you. So in terms of the double diamond, as you know, one of my favorites, it takes you to just after that definition stage, but with a really clear understanding of the need behind the need and a really clear map from goal to deliverables. In terms of ADDIE, it brings you to that design stage, but underpinned by that compelling question. And again, with that real strength of here's the goal, here's the deliverables. And within that successive approximation model, or SAM, which is an agile way to create e-learning or digital learning, it takes you to that background, just after the background stage, but you're there with evidence. So when it comes to that agile iterative approach, you always have that evidence to come back to. Now, all that thinking on one page, we have our full map, but we also have all those evidence points that we brought together as we went through each of those stages. And the fantastic thing about all of these evidence points is you have a real sort of map of these different pieces of information that we've pulled throughout. And what you can do is take those different pieces and map them to existing frameworks like the Kirkpatrick model or the Learning Transfer Evaluation model, or LTEM. And potentially, we might do a webinar on that in the future too, if you're interested. So, what are you leaving with here today? Essentially, here's a couple of tips from me and a bit of a personal view. Start with the goal, not the learning. Anchor that conversation in the business outcome, not the course, not the content. Use it as a conversational tool, not a checklist. The value is in the discussion, not just the artifact. Stay grounded in that observable behavior. Ask, what would we see if this were happening? Avoid those fuzzy words like awareness or engagement. Call those blockers out loud. Name them, challenge them. Behavior change doesn't happen in a vacuum. use it to test that alignment across roles. Use the map to check are leaders, HR managers, all aiming at the same outcome, and treat it as a living tool. Come back to it as the behavior shift and context changes. Come back to it, use it, revisit it as you go through the process of that development and eventually deploying it. And lastly, for me, there's no such thing as a silly question. Use that curiosity to your advantage. Now, you'll also be leaving today with a template. This is the Miro version of the template, but we'll also have a PDF version. And lastly, for me, here's what I learned from that first walk from my dad, with my dad. So essentially, actually train and prepare for the next one. Get some walking poles, plan that route, and agree it beforehand, before going on the path, and prepare for the weather better so I don't look like a drowned rat like I do in that picture. Although, much like learning enablement, much like a hill, isn't about charging forward. It's very much about being equipped for the climb. And you'll be rewarded with the results if you put that effort in at the start, much like my dad and I when we got all the way up to the top of that hill. So just the closing thought for me, stop designing for and instead design with. So thank you for me.
Thank you from me.